Hello and welcome to the Creativity Conference's official podcast. My name is Aidan Rhode. I'm the assistant manager here at the Creativity Conference, and I'm very excited to be hosting this podcast where I'll be discussing all aspects of creativity with some world-class creative minds who we are lucky enough to have joining us as speakers for the conference coming up in August 2022 in Reykjavik. Today, I'm joined by Gordon MacLellan, who is an incredible storyteller, artist, and environmental educator, better known online as Creeping Toad. Gordon, how are you doing?
Hi, Aidan. I'm fine on this freezing cold morning here in Buxton. Yeah, we haven't got snow yet, but they keep promising it.
Yeah, you delivered a fantastic presentation and a panel for the Creativity Conference back in August 2021 for our online iteration. How did you find the conference? Did you attend any other sessions?
Yeah, I did. Dropped in on a few sessions and on some of the other panels, so that was really interesting. I suppose I should confess the bit I found most exciting was the sort of after talk soirees with the other speakers, and it was it was fascinating to meet the breadth of the breadth of creativity that was being brought together there, because I'm used to working in situations where you tend to meet either lots of artists or lots of environmentalists, and to have this complete sort of jumble of people from all sorts of disciplines and professions was really exciting.
Yeah, those were quite popular. The sort of after conference parties, I say,
Yeah.
um, and yeah, it was a really nice sort of informal way to sort of debrief from the
Mm.
day and have
Hmm.
everybody go, "Oh, I really enjoyed this session." Someone goes, "Oh,
Hmm.
I was there too. That was a really interesting point that they made." And yeah, there were speakers, attendees, and those, and I agree. Those were really fun to go to. How did moving on from the conference, how did the pandemic affect your sort of workflow and creativity? Did you find that it overall creatively sort of stifled you in some ways, or perhaps enabled you in other ways that you weren't expecting?
Um, oh, that's one of those questions. It's really hard to know where to start in an answer. Um,
It's been 2 years.
yes, yes. When did it begin? How long ago? In one level, it has been a nightmare. Because most of my income earning work is direct contact, is face to face, sitting in front of a group of people telling stories, and that stopped overnight. And it's sort of starting again, and it has been since last summer, but in a very careful, very cautious sort of way. So in that sense, it's been really difficult. Um, in other ways, as that as that door closed, another project I was working with kept going, and my role within it increased, and most of that was digital, so that was really good. And there I was working as the arts coordinator and small environmental group manager for a big faith, art, and nature project that was aiming to do a great big celebratory event in St Albans Cathedral, and in the end that couldn't happen either. But that the work around Celebration Earth was really good for me, partly because it gave me an income, but also it was an opportunity to connect with all sorts of different groups and groups I'd never met before. So that was good. So we've had that sort of mixture of some things closing, other things getting going. Um, and on a personal level, I always try and keep. I always try to be clear with myself about what my professional creativity is and where my personal creativity is, because it's very easy to lose the personal in the professional. Um, and I'm very aware of how much I actually need to just give myself time to make things for myself. And so this has been quite good because it means I've had time. There's been some really nice work with Buxton Museum and Art Gallery where I was sort of coordinating a team of artists but the challenge for all of us was to do our own responses to issues around the museum. So it was somebody else saying, pointing a finger almost and just saying, can you just think about and then write something or make something? And I respond really well to that. I like being offered a challenge to rise to. Leave me on my own for my creativity, and there's no telling where it goes. So at the moment I'm creating a whole set of Baba Yaga poems, which are probably too unpleasant, perhaps, for most of my usual audiences.
Yeah, Baba Yaga is sort of that's sort of a Russian tale, isn't it? About sort of a witch in the woods.
Yeah, I mean, Baba Yaga is almost like the ancestor of every fairy tale witch you've ever heard, and she is a wonderful mixture of ferocious and terrifying, and also the person you absolutely need to meet.
Yes.
She is, scary, but if you survive the encounter, you will be ever so much stronger.
Yes.
So she's,
So outside of your the work that you've been doing over the past 2 years, what are some of your creative outlets outside of work that have kept you fulfilled creatively?
I don't actually know. What I do a lot of writing and I do a lot of making that doesn't always see the wider light of day. I think for me, writing, particularly writing poetry, is a processing process. It's where I stop and reflect, and putting things in words helps shape the experience for me. So I'm always writing. Every so often I'll produce a new little collection of poems, which never sell very many, but I'm not very good at the sort of the relentless self-promotion that you need to do to sell poetry usually. And I love making things. I make lots of the puppets. If I just turn around now, which of these are dry enough to lift up? I'm at the moment. Let's see if we can move him. I'm working on a set of little trolls.
Nice.
So he's still drying. So this is it earring pins? There we go. His earring pins are still sort of in. So he will be painted and there'll be a whole body attached to him shortly. And so that's what I've been working on just now.
Those of you listening on Spotify might have to go over to the YouTube version of this podcast at the moment. But I can describe it. It's very good. It's a very amazing looking troll. So speaking of sort of things that you come out with but don't necessarily push out to the world, you've obviously worked on a lot of projects over your creative career and beyond. What are some potentially lesser known about or underappreciated projects or work that you've done that you have a bit of a soft spot for, particularly proud of, and you wished more people did know about?
Going way back, I mean, it must be 20 years, I think, 20 years ago that we were doing these. We did a whole series of projects in I think in 3 schools, maybe 4 schools, called A Life of Stone, that had children looking at geology and building an understanding of the processes that ended up the processes that led to the small round stone they were holding in their hands. And then we turned that understanding into poems and dance and puppets, and we created these wonderfully insane performance pieces that were just a delight, because when we had a group at one point of maybe 10 children with a huge bit of blue cloth becoming an ancient limestone sea and just floating across the school playground and gradually fossilizing their classmates, by wrapping them in sandstone coloured cloth, until at the end of that little bit of the performance, the water rippled off, and we had this sort of sand bed of sandy coloured fabric. And when you looked, you could just see all these strange lumpy shapes that were curled up children. And it was things like that. It was one of those threads that just seemed to spark everyone's imagination, and really got people excited and enthused. And I think for a lot of, or not so much for a lot of funders, but for where I was and where the groups I worked with were at the time, we weren't in a good position for chasing funding. And it's one of those things, like, actually, a bit more backing on that, and it could have gone to all sorts of other places.
Did anybody do that for you when you were at school as a child? Did anybody do workshops like that?
No. In a word, no.
So as a kid, did you envision yourself as going into the creative industries?
No, I mean, it wasn't that wasn't a determined sort of goal, but it was always there. I've always made things. I've always written. I did rummaging around in a box a year or two ago. I found my first novel that I wrote when I was 12, and it filled up one whole exercise book, and I'd completely forgotten about it. But so I was writing then. I was making things then. I By formal training, I'm a zoologist, and that's always been, and that always was for me where I wanted to go. That sort of exploring the animal worlds, as it were, and as a scientist, I always found the creative disciplines ran parallel to the scientific ones. So I think my creativity, it developed in tandem with sort of scientific understanding, and at some point it just seemed much more. It made much more sense to go down a creative route, so that if you like, I express the understanding that I get through zoology and ecology through creativity. So I think that's how I ended up being a creative, as it were. But it was never one of my formal trainings.
Right. Well, actually, this is not the first time that nature has enabled creativity in a
Mm.
completely other discipline. I mean, I had Michael Bernier on the
Oh
podcast a
yeah.
few episodes ago, and he's an architect. He's a designer of houses and gardens. But he said that in his session in August, that he says that nature is the perfect designer and the sort of epitome of the perfect storyteller and the perfect
Mhm.
partner of creativity. Would you agree with this idea that nature is just creativity at its finest?
Oh, absolutely. And with degrees of subtlety that we just can't get our heads around. I think humans are very good at thinking they know. Um, and it's only when you start looking within natural systems, you just find layers and layers and layers of subtlety and interaction that no one had guessed. So yeah, absolutely. I think Michael's completely right.
And on the note of nature and creativity, when did the name Creeping Toad become your sort of a description of you, and what was the story of choosing that?
Well, Creeping Toad as a formal designation came about in think came about in 1985. I'd just come back from working in Malawi in Africa, and I set up Creeping Toad as my creative side. At that point, I was mostly making costume, and I wanted a company name, and Toad had to be there. And creeping just felt like the best adjective to go with it. So Creeping Toad as a an idea as an identity has been there since 1985, but toads have been with me since I could walk. They've always been the thing that has, if you like, sat beside me, sat inside me. My mum used to say that my brother and sister would bring friends home from school, and I'd bring frogs in a jam jar. And amphibians have always been important to me. So when I set the company up, it was inconceivable that it would have any name other than an amphibian one, and it has always been toads for me more than anything else.
That's a great story. That's a great explanation. Do you still do that? Do you find yourself getting little jam jars of amphibians?
I don't bring them home so much, but people who are watching this rather than listening to it, behind me there's a big fish tank that's glowing very green at the moment. If I just move sideways a little bit, you can show up past my wonderfully tidy desktop. I have a house that's full of animals that needed homes. So there's sort of refugee axolotls in the tank behind me. There's a colony of fire-bellied toads in another vivarium. Here where I live in Buxton in the Peak District of the UK, and just up the road there's one of Derbyshire's biggest toad colonies, and every spring I go and stand in a stream with a bucket and help toads. They get trapped. The stream has a very gentle side that's easy to get into, and then a very steep side that they can't climb. And so they will just keep trying to climb that to get to the ponds where they're going to breed. They will keep trying to climb that wall until they die. So I go and stand around with a bucket rescuing toads every spring, and we usually move about 1,000 in a 2-week phase. So yes, there are still frogs and toads turning up repeatedly. Oh, and I should get a quick plug in while we're at it. I'm a trustee for a charity called Frog Life, who works on reptile and amphibian conservation and education in the UK.
Yep, that's the place to do it.
Yeah.
You mentioned Malawi a minute ago. You spent quite a chunk of your earlier career in Malawi and Africa. Can you elaborate a bit more on that experience and what you learned from a creative standpoint?
Well, I'd finished my degree as a zoologist. I'd done a teacher training, and literally sort of 2 months later found myself standing on an airport in the middle of Africa with my luggage having gone somewhere else. Just thinking, what have you just done? So I was there for 3 years. My first job was teaching biology, chemistry, and geology at a place called Kamuzu Academy, which has survived, is still there now, and it was brilliant, challenging in all sorts of ways, but intensely exciting. Again, for me as an animal person, after 3 years, nothing had lost its glamour. Just to sit outside in your garden with the light on of an evening meant insects would come flying up to the light that I'd never seen before. And so it was incredibly exciting like that. The landscapes were like nothing I'd ever met before. The people were wonderful. The students we were working with were great. And yeah, hard work, very hard work, because it's first job and first teaching job. So you've got lots to do, but also just in an amazing environment. And I did a lot of drawing. I illustrated a couple of books for people out there, and just I think it gave me a chance to stop, perhaps. After all the intensity of university and things like that. First job in a place where there aren't a lot of other distractions. We lived 100 miles from Lilongwe, the capital city, pretty much out in the bush. So we were just sort of in our own little community, doing our own thing. And so there was time to just explore what I wanted to be creatively.
And did you find that the students, because of the completely different environment to the UK or just a general Western country, did you find that their approach to creative subjects was wildly different, and for better or for worse, than Western students might be?
Difficult to answer, because I have never formally taught art or sort of creative subjects like that. What we did find, certainly coming in from the science point of view, it was the sheer enthusiasm of people for learning that was quite frightening, especially when, I was 22 when I went there. And some of our A-level students and some of the ones from earlier years were almost the same age as me. And they were just so keen to learn, that it was literally just trying to keep a chapter ahead in textbooks and sort of preparing things in advance and finding ways of stalling people's enthusiasm. You say, well, I think we'll have to come to that bit later. We'll get on to that. I mean, we shouldn't run before we can walk, and cliches of that ilk. So that was great. The art that people were producing in things like in things like the school art department was wonderful, but again, they were working to UK A-level syllabuses, so they were probably working quite conventional forms. What was interesting and exciting, and that I still find marvelous when I work in South Africa now, is the music, and is the fact that people are much more ready just to sing than the sheer embarrassment of a class in the UK. A class of teenagers being expected to sing, and you can almost feel that sort of creeping horror. And there, people would just dive in and they just go for it, and it's that sense of a culture where people are much more ready to express themselves, in all sorts of ways, whether it's song, whether it's dance, whether it's picking up a drum and going for it. That is a much stronger sort of cultural thread than we'd be comfortable with here, and so that's great. It's just really rewarding and sort of reassuring as well at the time.
And another amazing place in the world where creativity is going to be brought is Iceland in August 2022, and hopefully you will be joining us there, Gordon.
Yep.
What are you particularly looking forward to, excited about Iceland?
This is yet another of those "where do I start" moments. One, I'm really excited about going to Iceland, to that landscape and seeing that landscape, and I'm meeting the local people there, and within the conference, it's physically meeting the range of people. I know there'll be some overlap. I hope there'll be some overlap from the people who all worked together last summer. But again, appreciating that the huge diversity of creativity that got together at the online conference, meeting those people in the flesh, or those sort of people in the flesh, is actually what excites me. It's the thought of, wow, we could actually just sit down in a bar of an evening and have a good natter and not be feeling I'm staring at a screen all day. And likewise, then, to meet the people who come as delegates and to find what draws them there. What's the excitement that they bring, and where do all those excitements meet, and what will happen when they meet? And I love that uncertainty, almost, that we don't know what the dynamic will give us in the end.
It's going to be amazing, and I'm hugely looking forward to it. The final question, Gordon, before we wrap up, is a bit of a tricky one, but I've asked it to everybody, and there's been some fantastic different answers. But it's a very open-ended. What does creativity mean to you?
Listeners, there will now be a long silence while I think. I'd say creativity is, and I'm now trying to find a way of saying this without it just sounding like a really, really trite fridge magnet homily.
Just spitball, just whatever.
Yeah, I mean, for
comes to
me,
mind.
creativity is the expression of life. I think for me, that's it. I mean, for me, to be alive is a joy, and to live in the world. We live in a world that's worth celebrating. That despite everything else that's happening, despite whether it's social injustice, whether it's environmental injustice, you just need to stop and look at the world and realize how utterly amazing it is and how absolutely fabulous the other beings we share the world with are. And for me, creativity is the expression of that sense of wonder. In all its forms, whether it's joy, whether it's fear, whether it's despair, but it's the heart of communication is creativity.
Wonderfully put. That was brilliant. And on that note, thank you very much for joining me, Gordon. That's about all the time that we have. Again, I'm very much looking forward to Iceland, August 2022. It's going to be amazing, and hopefully we'll see some of you listening there as well.
Yeah.
It's going to be just a brilliant event. I can't wait. I can't wait.
Yeah.
So thank you again for joining me. Thanks for listening, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, and thanks very much, Aidan, and thanks to everyone for joining us, and see you in Iceland.